Before we get started, I'd like to thank our members Kathy Green, Lisa Giordano, and Camilla Ross for putting together this series. I would also like to remind you to stay muted during the panel discussion.
The government of Michigan.
Someone's on. Okay, we got that muted. Okay, so let's get started. Our moderator, Kia A. Baird, is a certified employment support professional. She holds roles both as a manager of vocational programming and as a job developer. Her work allows her to fulfill her purpose of connecting people with opportunities. She serves as the president of the New London County section of the National Council of Negro Women, an organization that was founded in 1935 by Mary McLeod Bethune to work collectively for women's rights and the rights of young people. Very cool. Kia is a former ambassador for the Eastern Connecticut Chamber of Commerce, Young Professionals, and served the chamber as a member of its board of trustees. In 2013, Kia received the Young Professionals Community Service Award, and in 2015, she was honored with her peers as one of the region's 40 under 40. Following that, Kia was privileged to become one of the Southeastern Connecticut Professional Women of the Year and 100 Women of Color for Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. You haven't done much, Kia.
This is the long version. Oh, boy.
I tried to paraphrase, too. Actually shorter. Kia is a founding member of the Eastern Connecticut Urban Professionals, an organization that is dedicated to networking and career development for professionals in the urban parts of our state. She's also the president of OutCT, an organization that works to build a community through educational and social programming that promotes acceptance and understanding of the LGBTQ community. And Kia is also the co-chair of the Southeastern Connecticut Reentry Council, serving individuals that are returning to the community after incarceration. She is also on the diversity board for the Norwich Bulletin and has been featured several times as a guest columnist. She is also a classically trained soprano and studied the business of music at the historically Black college, Winston-Salem State University. She is a former board of directors member of the Norwich Arts Center, where she created Miss Lottie's Cafe, a jazz theater series named for art and community activist Lottie B. Scott in historic Norwich, Connecticut. She is also the founder of Girls in Jazz, and she serves on the executive committee for the Southeastern Connecticut Cultural Coalition. Her dream is to connect people with passion and creativity to opportunities that develop exceptional business acumen, drive economic development, and strengthen the community as a whole. Welcome, Kia, and thank you for joining us. And coincidentally, Kia, did you know that Lottie Scott is our guest speaker next week?
I did not know that. I'm not surprised. We all love Miss Lottie.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. So thank you, Kia, for joining us today.
Thank you, and I apologize for the very, very, very long bio.
So much there, and actually I skipped some of it, so if you guys would like to learn more about Kia, you can see it on our website or on our Facebook page.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the committee for allowing me the freedom to reach out to the folks that you're going to hear from and facilitate this conversation. I'm super excited because maybe it was good that you read the long bio, because I don't think I'm gonna have to say much else, because the women who you're gonna hear from are so powerful, and they have so much historical information to share with you, and are really going to facilitate, I think, a robust conversation about women and voting. I'm going to let Jean and Joanne introduce themselves, but I wanted to take a moment to say a very special thank you to Dr. Elsie Scott, who is with us today on behalf of the National Council of Negro Women, national organization. So I just completed my tenure just completed my tenure as president of the New London County section of NCNW, and our new president just started a week or so ago, Debbie Carter. So we're so thankful. And as our little state, we really are so appreciative of national NCNW sending representation. So I am going to introduce you all to Dr. Scott, and then ask Jean and Joanne to introduce yourselves, tell bit about themselves as well. So Dr. Elsie Scott is the founding director of the Ronald Walters Leadership and Public Policy Center. She accepted the task of developing and launching the Walters Center in the fall of 2012. After serving as the president and CEO of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. She is the co-chair of the Civic Engagement Committee for NCNW and a board member of the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation. Wow, okay, told you guys I was nervous. She also served as the executive director of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives and has served on faculty at several universities, including Howard University, Rutgers University, North Carolina Central University, and the University of Central Florida. She received her BA from Southern University, her MA from the University of Iowa, and her PhD from Atlanta University, now Clark Atlanta University, all in political science. So you hear all of the HBC you love there. So again, I'm so excited to have you with us, Dr. Scott. And with that, I think we will get started. Joanne, would you be interested in introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about who you're representing today and what you do?
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here. I'm really excited about exploring this topic with you. I'm in East Lyme, Connecticut, which is my hometown. I can see my high school from my desk. I joined the League of Women Voters about 4 years ago when I became concerned about the role of women in society under this administration. I know I'm not supposed to be political, but that's the truth of it. The League of Women Voters of Connecticut is a nonpartisan political organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. It influences public policy through education and advocacy. We never support or oppose a certain political candidate or party, but we do advocate for causes. We study issues that we think affects our lives, and then we lobby and try to influence our elected officials. In my local league, I'm the program chair, so that every month I develop an interesting educational activity for our members. And I'm one of several members who moderates political debates prior to elections for both state and local offices. At the state level, I serve on the board, where I'm involved in membership. And by the way, despite the name of our organization, we welcome members of all genders. And once I was on the board, they directed me towards becoming the chair of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the league at the state level, with guidance from our League of Women Voters US. And I attended some training on that. We do recognize that the league has a racist history, and we are making intentional effort to correct that and overcome it. At the international level, I have represented the league at the United Nations, serving as a delegate to the Commission on the Status of Women. In my personal life, I am a physical therapist, and that's been for 46 years, and I enjoy that. And I have 2 sons, 6 grandchildren, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here.
Mm-hmm.
Jean, You want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hi, I'm Jean Jordan. I am the president of the Greater New London NAACP. The NAACP is the oldest and the boldest, the most revered and feared civil rights organization in the country. We are the oldest civil rights organization in the United States. The only civil rights organization older than us is the NRA, and I don't think most of us think of the NRA as a civil rights organization. We are 111 years old, and our branch is 64 years old. So we've been around for a while. I have been the president. I think this is my third term. I lost count. This is election year, and I hope this is it for me, but who knows? We, as I said, our branch is the Greater New London branch. We also have a Norwich branch, and because of that, we don't normally call ourselves Greater New London because Norwich isn't part of New London County. But we go from the Baldwin Bridge to the Rhode Island line and up to Norwich. Norwich goes from Norwich up to Willimantic Windham, and Willimantic Windham goes up to, let's say, the Massachusetts line. All the presidents in eastern part of the state are female, so we're very proud of that. So as I said, we, most revered, and because we're all women presidents, we feel very proud of that in this part of the state. I am a former teacher, but actually I am still a teacher because this year I am in the Waterford Public Schools. I decided to take a little break from New London and decided to go back to Waterford, and I am at Great Neck School this year. So, and I would like to very much thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, for any of you who have been to my events before, you know that I have pop quizzes and questions, and if you know me even further than that, you know that I got it from my mother, who who is a trainer. So, so there will be quizzes throughout throughout our conversation today. But the first one is. Make sure they're all in here. Yes, they are. All right. So if you are on a tablet or on your computer, you can just vote there. Not vote there, but answer this question about voting. I like what I'm seeing. I like what I'm seeing so far. Oh man, you guys are gonna love this. All right, so we have 103%. I don't know how you do that, but we 103% of you all are registered to vote. So that makes me very, very happy. And whoever that extra 3% is, I love you too. So very, very excited. And I'm glad that you are here for this conversation. And already understand the importance of your vote. With NCNW, we tend to do a lot of voter registration events and drives and things like that. And a lot of times we see people, everybody is registered to vote. Oh, I'm registered, I'm registered, I'm registered. And then we see some differences in those who are registered and those who go out to vote, right? So that's why we don't want to stop at the registration. We want to continue to have a conversation with folks so that registration is translated to an actual person going to vote. So that's why we continue these conversations, because we want you all to be empowered, and we want you to be educated voters and to share that education with your friends and your families. All right, so let's get into it. So how I structured tonight is that we are going to hear from each of the panelists in a specific area. They're going to talk to you a little bit about their areas of study or areas of expertise or passion. And then we're going to go into some more general questions. But just as an agenda, you'll know that that's what we're going to do. And they're kind of in chronological order with many things that are overlapping, because as you can imagine, we are women, so many of our identities intersect. So our histories intersect. So, so we are gonna start with Joanne. And my question for you is, are you able to speak to your knowledge on the women's suffrage movement?
Yes, I am. All right, this will be about 5 minutes long, so I hope it's more interesting than the history teachers that I had in school. The Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights recognize the power of the human spirit and try to protect individual rights while still protecting society from abuse of individual power. But there's no mention of women in these revered documents. Why ever not? Well, the fact is that the work of women simply was not respected. They functioned in roles of servant, adornment, punching bag, or as a conduit to receiving a dowry, a title, or an inheritance. But women have always been an integral part of society, acting as managers, teachers of children, social mediators. They've often covered for husbands who are away or incompetent. And remember way back when John Adams left home in Philadelphia for the Continental Congress, his wife Abigail beseeched him, "Remember the ladies." While he was away in Philadelphia, Abigail was on the farm, managing it, and homeschooling their 5 children. Yet when he returned home, he had to report to her that in order to pass more important concepts, the Constitution could not include a mention of women. This denial of women's rights at high levels of government began in this country at its very inception. Without legal protection and standing, women without a voice in government. Fast forward now 80 years, that's 4 generations, to 1848. And women gathered at Seneca Falls, New York, and made a Declaration of Sentiments. It was written by Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott. These 2 women had developed a friendship in Paris 7 years before. They were there to lobby against slavery, but they were devastated that they were not allowed to speak publicly because of their gender. The Declaration of Sentiments read something like the Bill of Rights, beginning with, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one party of the family of man to assume," and it continues that they are endowed by their maker of certain inalienable rights. I want you to think about that wording, endowed by their maker. But throughout history, people have tried to deprive other people of these rights. I don't want to hear that women were given the right to vote. They were endowed by their maker by that right. And now that right was simply being recognized by the government and no longer being impeded. Their list of complaints in the Declaration of Sentiments gives us a clue as to how lowly the status of women was. They complained that she has no right to property, even to the wages that she earns. Husbands have the power to deprive liberty and to administer chastisement. In the case of a divorce, the husband would take the children. She was still taxed if she had anything to tax. All colleges were closed to women, and they were unable to participate publicly in any sort of church activity. Remember that churches were also the center of government in the town. So the Declaration of Sentiments was the beginning of a formal demand for the right of women to vote, but the quest to vote was much more than that. It was a quest to be fully human with all of its rights and responsibilities. Today's marketing experts would appreciate the suffragists' sophistication. They understood the impact of branding their quest. They chose a color theme, gold for sunflowers, a symbol of hope, purple for loyalty, and white for purity. The women suffragists who were there in 1848 never lived long enough to see the 19th Amendment passed, granting the right to vote. But they did offer a legacy to us of persistence and courage that holds vital lessons for today's political activists. Protest is important and patriotic, but it must be followed up by well-designed and sustained political strategies in order to enact lasting change. Over many years, the suffragists did not just march and picket, they also debated and lobbied, drafted legislation, and campaigned. They learned effectively to communicate their cause to the public, build alliances, master the intricacies of legislative procedure, and pull the levers of power. In 1920, finally, there was one more state needed to ratify the 19th Amendment. Unfortunately, it was Tennessee. All the southern states had already defeated it. People from all over the country came to lobby those state elected officials. And you may know that those who supported women's suffrage wore pink roses on their lapel, and those who opposed suffrage wore red roses. Lobbying was frantic up to the last minute. Harry Burns, mere 25 years old, was a Tennessee state senator wearing a red rose. While in session, though, he was handed a note from his mother. Be a good boy and help Mrs. Catt, the founder of the League of Women Voters, with ratification, she admonished him. Byrne tucked the letter into his jacket pocket next to his heart, and he sat through the final debates and roll call in the House chamber on the morning of August 18th. When his name was called for the final vote for ratification, the tally was tied. He had to take a stand. Byrne shocked the chamber by voting aye for ratification. The antis accused him of taking a bribe, but he was unapologetic. I believe in full suffrage as a right, Byrne told his colleagues, and I knew that a mother's advice is always the safest for a boy to follow, and my mother wanted me to vote for ratification. So women continued the effort to gain the right to vote. In Connecticut, white women gained access to the vote a month later, in September of 1920, but they were discouraged from voting by using tried and true tactics, poll taxes, literacy tests, and other forms of harassment. So the women kept working even after the 19th Amendment was secured. They wanted to be sure that women were educated on the public issues, and they wanted to bring forward issues that were important for women. For example, laws governing child labor and worker safety conditions, educational opportunities, and divorce law and reproductive rights. Catherine Catt founded the League of Women Voters in 1920, and it is still today in the forefront of demanding the protection of voter rights. Voting rights are the stress test of the health of our democracy, the most meaningful way to commemorate the 100th centennial of the 19th Amendment. And this suffrage movement was made up of women of all classes, all races, all political persuasions, and party affiliations. And so our way of honoring them is to rededicating ourselves to expanding and improving our democracy by protecting voting rights for all citizens, making sure that every citizen can vote without barriers, without difficulty, and without fear. I will conclude by saying that women have come a long way since Abigail Adams. I wish that we could simply sit back and drink champagne and celebrate. But as you know, unfortunately, we have a long way to go to achieve true equity. From looking at our history, we know that perseverance is important. I would suggest that we see opportunity in the crises of today and recognize that each small group of us women have some power And just imagine how exponentially our influence would grow if we worked together. Imagine a world where each person had opportunities, encouragement, mentorship, and resources to develop their talents and make a contribution to our society. I challenge you to accept the baton in this relay race toward a more just world and find where your talents can make a difference. Start with your vote.
Thank you so much, Joanne.
Thank you.
I can't wait to ask you questions after. So we have another poll. This one is really a quiz. Let's see. Kind of a trick question, the placement of the. There's a few more folks here. All right, I think everyone is in. All right, so here are your responses. Can you see those? All right, I'm gonna close that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Scott, who is going to tell us the correct answer to the question.
Okay, I guess I can tell the answer if I could find a way to unmute myself. Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here as I'm substituting for Jean Mathis, who is the executive director of NCNW. She had another speaking engagement tonight, and she did not want you all to go without a speaker, so she reached out to me to ask me if I would substitute. So if I don't do so well, just say that I didn't have enough time to prepare. But you are anxiously waiting on the answer to that question, so let me just talk. Well, the most of you knew the answer. The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. But I want to talk a little bit about pre-Voting Rights Act and how we came to the Voting Rights Act. When you gave us the first question, I thought that was going to be a trick question. So, are you registered to vote? I thought then you're going to come back and say, how do you know you're registered to vote? Because in this election year, we have to ask that, because even though you registered, even though you voted, when you get to the polls, you may not be registered to vote. And we'll talk about some of the suppression issues later, but I just want to throw that out there so you'll be thinking about when we get to that section of the discussion about suppression. But I'm a native of Louisiana, and I'm the daughter of an NAACP president. I'm the daughter of a civil rights activist, and my father was the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit that got the right for Black people to vote. In my parish, we don't have counties in Louisiana. In my parish, we were one of the 3 last parishes in Louisiana for Black people to get the right to vote after Reconstruction, because people had voted, they had held office during Reconstruction, but by the 1920s, they had forced all Black people off the books, and they had run all the Black elected officials out of town. The verbal history is that the Black elected officials who were still in power were meeting in City Hall, and white people came in with guns and told them they better leave or they would get killed. And that was the end of voting in my home parish for years. So for some reason, my father decided that it was his duty to gain that right back. But it took him 15 years to get that right back. He tried some of everything, and they would try to get registered to vote, and there were all kinds of tactics that were used to keep them from registering. We had in Louisiana at that time, you had the Literacy Act, and you had to be able to read and interpret the Constitution. And the registrar might give you a clause from the Constitution. The registrar might ask you to recite the preamble to the Constitution, might ask you to recite the Bill of Rights, or whatever. At that time it was a woman, white woman who was the registrar of voters. And just whatever she felt like asking you to do, and you were always wrong. You never could pass the test. Now, Louisiana also had some written literacy tests, and they were used in many of the other parts of Louisiana. So that's the reason why you had Black people registered in New Orleans and other places, because they had literacy tests that Black people knew how to pass. So one of the things I did when I was a child, I studied the literacy tests, and I taught people how to pass the literacy test. Of course, before my father's successful lawsuit, it didn't matter. They never passed the test, even though I knew that, and my parents knew that they knew all the different versions of the tests throughout Louisiana, because the NAACP was able to collect all the different versions, or people were able to memorize. So we had all the questions of the test. So we were able, as a child, I learned how to pass the test, but they still would not allow you to register to vote. So they tried tactics. Sometimes my father said he would go to the registrar's office to register, and the registrar would just not be there. And so he'd ask somebody, where is she? So, oh, she went out to lunch. They'd wait, and she wouldn't come back. But eventually they may see some white people come in to register, and they would go in the back. And they eventually started following the white people in the back and found that she was hiding in the back in a storeroom and registering white people. So after trying every kind of maneuvers, then in Louisiana, they had an ID test. Do you all know what an ID test is? They have them now in a lot of states, but it was kind of different in Louisiana. Now you have to have an ID card. So sometimes your ID card is not appropriate now because the state law has different provisions for what is acceptable. If you don't have a driver's license, in many states, you may have a problem getting registered to vote. And this has been challenged in a lot of places. But in Louisiana, it was not about having a driver's license. It was about having 2 registered voters who could identify that you were a person of good character, and therefore you could qualify to get registered to vote. So it had to be 2 registered voters that identified you. And try as they could, no Black person could get 2 white people who would come and identify them so they could get registered to vote. My father used to talk about this one woman who was domestic for a white family. And she says that, I know my white people will come and identify me. So she went to the courthouse and they never came to identify her. Because even the whites that wanted to come and identify, they were afraid, because one white man did come identify, and then they stopped shopping in his store. White minister, they tried to run him out of town because he wanted to come and identify. So they had a way of intimidating you, whether you were black or white, in terms of keeping black people from registering to vote. So finally, my father decided he better get an attorney. And so the NAACP gave him an attorney. And the case drug on for so long until the attorney decided to move to California because he could not make a living in Louisiana trying to be a lawyer. And it wasn't until they created the Civil Rights Commission, U.S. Civil Rights Commission, and they started holding hearings in the South. So in 1959, they came to Louisiana, and my father was the first person to testify before the Civil Rights Commission about how they had stopped him from getting registered to vote. And after my father testified, then that's when all hell broke loose in terms of harassment, et cetera, against my family. And then eventually, Louisiana passed a law outlawing, I don't know whether Ms. Jordan knows that, they passed a law outlawing the NAACP. The NAACP was, I've forgotten what was the name they called it. It wasn't a terrorist, but it was like a subversive organization. And so therefore it could not operate in Louisiana. So my father was the president and my mother was the secretary. So they had to go underground with the NAACP. And so I remember one day the sheriff coming to my house. My father was out of town, and he came and picked up my mother and said she had to go to the courthouse. And they were interrogating her about operating an illegal organization. And it just so happened that was the day my father was coming back in town. And when my father arrived back in town, my brothers told him that the police had come and picked my mother up. And that's probably the maddest I've ever seen my father, because he didn't know what had happened to my mother. He was really concerned that they knew he was out of town and they were going to come and no telling what they would do. But they were not able to find the records. So my parents were not convicted. They didn't go to jail for running an illegal organization, but they continued to try to get the right to vote. So try to cut this short, because I don't want to take up too much time, that eventually the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Justice Department sent lawyers to Louisiana. And they sent lawyers who had just gotten out of law school. And these young white men from the Justice Department, they didn't know what they were getting into. And they came down and they were harassed and their tires were slashed and they were harassed a lot. And most of them had grown up in Connecticut and other places up north, but they had not been subjected to this type of treatment. But they eventually took the case to court, and eventually they ruled against the registrar. The registrar had to register Black people. She could not use that as an excuse. So after the lawsuit, the registrar, I think by this time they had a male registrar. Anyway, the registrar decided that he would not register any Black people. He didn't care if the federal courts had ordered him to register. He would resign rather than register anybody. So an election was coming up. Black people were all excited because it was about 26 of them that were part of this lawsuit, and they thought they were going to be able to vote in the next election, the upcoming election. But they couldn't get registered because there was nobody to register them because the parish registrar had quit. So they went back to court and they asked the federal judge if he would register This is what the lawyers asked the federal judge would register them. And so in court, the literacy test was still valid because we don't have, remember, this is not 65, this was 62. And so the literacy test is still valid in Louisiana. It's still legal. So they had to pass the literacy test in court. And 26 or 22, I think, of the 26 people passed the test there in court. And my mother was the first one who was registered to vote. And so the judge say, she made my mother had a perfect score. And the judge said, of course you have a college degree. And my mother proudly says, no, just a high school education. But she also could have said, I have taken this test so many times until I could recite it in my sleep. But, and so that's how the first Black people got registered to vote. But most of the Black people in my home parish didn't get registered to vote until the Voting Rights Act. And this is what happened. You had the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, and many people thought that would settle some of the issues that Black people had down south. But then President Johnson realized that voting was still a big issue and that you need a Voting Rights Act. And so Congress passed by a majority, both in the House and the Senate. There was no big issue. And it passed, and they created the Voting Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act provided for federal registrars to come to the South. So there were certain places that were identified as having a history of discrimination. So my hometown was one of the places where they sent a federal registrar in order to get Black people registered. Mississippi, Alabama had federal registrars throughout their state. But that's when the majority of Black people in the South got registered to vote after they passed the Voting Rights Act. In addition to sending these federal registrars, they also, the federal government was allowed to have oversight over the state laws. And so anytime one of these states, I think it was 9 states initially that were under the Voting Rights Act, anytime one of those states went to try to change its law, it had to be pre-cleared by the U.S. Department of Justice. And so this helped to really increase Black voting in the South. But in 2013, the Supreme Court case of Shelby versus Holder, where the Supreme Court ruled that the South had proved itself honorable enough, and so they no longer needed these federal registrars. They no longer needed any type of pre-clearance. And so they pulled out the states, and these states no longer need to be under the federal authority. And they pulled them out, and like a day later, you started getting the passage of these various laws, starting with the ID laws, that now you end up with all these problems in the South, which we'll talk about later. But there's been a lot of talk since the Shelby versus Holder about the need to restore the Voting Rights Act. And Congressman John Lewis was one of the main leaders that tried to get the Voting Rights Act restored. And so in 2019, before he died, the House passed H.R. 4 with Terry Sewell from Alabama sponsoring it. And it passed in the House. And after John Lewis died, the House voted to change the name of it to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And you know where that bill is now? It's among the stack that's on Senator McConnell's desk. And it probably will not pass because, as you know, there will be very little legislative action taken till now until the next Congress. So I'll just shut up now. I'll probably talk too long. Sorry.
No, I'm blown away by your story. Thank you. Thank you so much. That is amazing. And especially as someone, you know, from Connecticut, who's all, with the exception of going to living in North Carolina for a short time, someone from New England, stories like that seem so abstract sometimes. So thank you for sharing that, real life story, and as a reminder, you know, that it wasn't all that long ago. So thank you. I know you have more stuff to talk about, so I'm going to ask you some more questions about that in a few. But again, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for those of you all who answered 1965. So, all right. So Jean, would you please speak to the role of the NAACP and how it impacted the vote for Black people and for women? So the work of the NAACP.
Actually, what I'm going to do is some of what Joanne said and some of what Elsie said. I'm going to speak to some of that in regards to the NAACP. As you heard Joanne talk about the 19th Amendment and how it was ratified in 1920, while it was ratified and gave women the right to vote, it was still a problem for Black women. They thought it was going to be, you know, equal for everyone, but for Black women, particularly in the South, but also in the North, it became a problem. Black women in Massachusetts received fake mail-ins telling them if they registered, they would receive fines. And in the South, of course, you had the Klan who tried to intimidate women into not voting. Also, the NAACP, 2 months after the election in 1920, testified before Congress about the 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments, that they were not enough, that those amendments were not enough. While, you know, the 14th granted all born and naturalized citizens, including former slaves, equal protection under the law, and the 15th gave African Americans the right to vote, it wasn't enough because of intimidation. Also, the suffragists did not always support Black women. And some of the suffragists put out falsehoods saying Black women were opposed to the suffrage movement, which was not necessarily true. So you had the Crisis magazine, which is the NAACP magazine, which was under the leadership of W.E.B. Du Bois, and he wrote an editorial in the Crisis stating that votes for women mean votes for Black women, and this was the promise of social betterment. If women had the vote, that meant they also had a say in what was going on in their community, as Joanne mentioned. So, you know, he kind of put a stop to that, you know, falsehood about how Black women did not want to be part of the suffrage movement. Now, Elsie talked about her family and what went on in Louisiana. The same thing was happening in Georgia. You know, the NAACP fought against the poll taxes and the literacy test. In 1946, you had Thurgood Marshall, who challenged the Georgia Democratic Party because you had people there who wanted to vote, and they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that they had the right to vote without discrimination. And the Georgia Democrats said that they tried to get around it by saying they were a private organization. Now, I know that shocked some people that this was the Democratic Party, but you have to remember back in the day, Black people voted as Republicans because that was the party of Lincoln. It wasn't until later years that Black people became Democrats. So Southern Democrats and Northern Democrats were two different entities at that time. So they still tried. And you had Eugene Talmadge, who was running for governor of the state of Georgia. And I can say he was a truly evil man. He told them that if Blacks voted, you can guarantee it would be the last time they ever voted. He was implicated in some lynchings, some straight out murders. And it wasn't until, I think, 2007 that they had the proof that he was involved in these terrible crimes. But as I said, the NAACP persevered. During that time, even though the NAACP was working to rectify these situations, Black people were too scared to be involved with the NAACP. So like Elsie said, they kind of went underground. After Eugene Talmadge died, after the election and before he had an inauguration, Black people came out and started joining the NAACP in record numbers. They ended up having 36 chapters in Georgia after Eugene Talmadge died. So people really came out and supported the organization. So it, from horrific circumstances came the movement. And it seemed to be that way in many southern states, from Louisiana to Georgia, even in the northern states. And if you look at what's going on now, you see history repeating itself, because even now we see some of the same things happening: fake mail-ins, intimidation. So, we have to learn from this past history and continue to work the change.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just as I mentioned, I knew that the things were going to intersect and overlap because our histories do, right?
Yeah.
All right. So thank you each for that, for the background.
Gosh, can I respond to Jean?
Sure.
Because you really hit it right on the head. When in Tennessee, when they were lobbying for this, they played the racist card by convincing the white men that because they had given the vote to the Black man, that the white women would vote with the white men and overpower the vote of the Black men. But if you gave it also to the Black women, that would equal out that advantage. And so, or equal out that disadvantage. So they gave the vote to the white women with the intention of minimizing the efficacy of the men's vote. It was very intentional. It was very nasty. It was very nasty. Mm-hmm.
And in one of their marches, Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell were not allowed to take part in it. So during the march, they disappeared. And as the march took place, they reappeared and they marched with the women. And at that point, they could not say anything. And Ida B. Wells wrote about it later on.
Yeah.
So they came out there, they marched with them. And at that point, there was nothing they can do.
Right. We have pictures of that.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of lynchings.
Yep.
I heard there were up to 4,000 lynchings.
Yes, there were.
That's more than intimidation.
Yeah.
That is.
No,
It was not horrific. It was murder.
that's exactly right.
It was done by the people who were in charge.
That's right.
Absolutely. Okay, so kind of staying in that vein, my question is for all of you, and it is, what do you see as the most important issue facing women in our upcoming election? Namely, with voter suppression, with mis and disinformation, as you are navigating this time, this climate, this world, the work that you all are doing, what do you see as the most important issues facing women as we head into this election? Who would like to start?
Do you mean the actual process of voting? What's our biggest challenge, or what's the biggest issue that women are voting about?
I think she probably.
Yes.
Well, they're closing polling places. They're slowing down the mail.
Voter suppression, definitely.
Voter suppression, wow.
I mean, after the last presidential debate, it's scary because basically it was a call to arms. And if you saw the news today, that call to arms went out, people went out and they attempted to kidnap the governor of Michigan, a white supremacist group. So we have really reason to be scared. I mean, the governor of Michigan is a female.
Mhm.
So it's like
A white female.
it doesn't make a difference, white or black. It is a call to arms against females. If they can't get the male, who is easier, it's going to be us females.
Yeah.
They think we're going to be easier to intimidate, and that's not necessarily so.
No.
Another big threat that we have this time, and well, I guess it's men and women, is the whole pandemic. That so many people are afraid to go out and stand in line. And so people who would normally vote. The other thing, you usually have a lot of women that are serving as poll watchers.
Yes.
And a lot of elderly women who are afraid now for their health. And so you don't have them working the polls now. You don't have these seasoned people who knew how to work the poll. And now you're having the president of the United States asking people to go out and watch the polls. I don't know what that means, but I'm concerned that that's a means of intimidating people who are coming to the polls.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So voter suppression, misinformation. How do you feel that we've been impacted in this election with misinformation and disinformation? Before we even got started, we talked about how we are bombarded on social media before you even put your feet on the floor in the morning. You open your phone, you turn on the news, and you are bombarded with information. Is that information correct? Is it accurate? Is it meant to confuse you? You know, what, you know, can any of you speak to that and how maybe we combat that, how we encourage people to be educated voters and to shield themselves from all of that energy? Joanne.
Well, today, Facebook employees got together and protested to their management that they were upset about that QAnon. And so the management responded to their employees from within. The company from within took down everything QAnon has put on. They're not going to post any more stuff from them. But we need these big companies, these big social media companies, to take leadership themselves, because our government's not helping us with that right now.
I like how Twitter, every time Donald Trump had a false statement, they took it down. He went to jail, basically.
Yes.
You know, that's a start. He didn't like it, but it's like, oh no, that was false. We're taking it down.
Yeah.
One thing we are finding that a lot of civic organizations are working to try to fight some of the misinformation that's being spread out here. Everything from the NAACP to religious organizations to civic engagement organizations that are trying to spread correct information or telling people how they can verify information. But one thing that usually happens, I know here in the Washington metropolitan area, especially in Maryland, on election day, and they may spread it out more because fewer people are scheduled to vote on election day. But on election day, they usually have all these robocalls going.
Yeah.
And they'll have a Black person speaking and giving people false information about, you know, your precinct polling place has changed, or this is Reverend so-and-so, and I'm urging you to vote for so-and-so, you know, who's not a person who would be operating in their interest. And then ballot initiatives, they constantly are trying to give people misinformation about ballot initiatives, because a lot of people don't read the background on those ballot initiatives. And then they get in the polls and it's a long thing. They're just trying to read it, trying to figure out how they should vote. And sometimes people just vote, oh, it sounds right, because the first sentence may sound right. But some of these initiatives are written that way so that when you read the first sentence, it's totally different from what you want to vote for.
Yeah.
And so that's a big problem. And people who don't study, you know, even people that don't have misinformation, if you don't study the ballot before you go to the poll and you get there and you don't know people. And I remember the case down in South Carolina, the man whose name sounded Black. Well, he was Black, but he had just gotten on the, as a joke, he had gotten on the ballot. And he had no qualifications for the job, for the position, but he got a lot of votes, enough votes to make it to the runoff, because people said, oh, he sounded, you know, his name was Jack Jones or something, you know, and it sounded like regular compared to the other person's name. And so you really have to be educated before you go to the polls. Otherwise, you can end up voting against your best interest.
Yeah.
Um,
The League of Women Voters has a 411.org website, vote411.org, and it has information about all the candidates and all the referendum issues. So you can read about each candidate and see what their positions are. The submissions are, or the information is submitted by the candidates themselves, word for word. We don't edit it at all. So you get a good sense of who they are. And so that's a great source of information if you're heading for the polls.
Thank you. Also, before we head into the next question, I do want to say that you're absolutely right. It is so important for you to know what's on the ballot before you go to the poll. You can go to the Secretary of State's website and get a wealth of information about our election. You can put in your town, your address, and it will show you your ballot. You can print it off if you want to. You can practice. You can write. You can write on it. And Dr. Scott is exactly right. Sometimes those referendums, they're written in ways, even though that's the job of the Secretary of State's office to make sure that they are more easily understood, but sometimes they are written in ways that are very difficult to decide whether yes means yes and no means no. Sometimes no means that you're voting against or for something, and yes means that you're voting against it. But absolutely take the time to go on the Secretary of State's website or Ballotpedia or, you know, Vote 411, and look at your ballot. Look at the folks on there. Look who's going to be on your ballot, because there are other things like probate judge and things like that that are going to be on your ballot that get lost in all of the social media, all of the news that we have around this presidential campaign, and you sometimes miss the other things that are going to be on your ballot, and you don't want to be surprised when you go to the polls.
Mm-hmm.
Also, on the Secretary of State's website, information about the difference between physically going to the poll and doing the absentee ballot. I know, you know, in my role at work and as one of many of the community organizations, it has been a goal of ours to get information to folks out about the election process this season. And, you know, one of the major questions that come up is, should I do an absentee ballot, right? So just as a general overview, in Connecticut, the application for absentee ballots went out. If you requested an absentee ballot, your ballot went out last week Wednesday, so you should be receiving it in the mail. My suggestion, I love the United States Post Office. I love postal workers. My suggestion, however, is to take your filled out ballot and put it in the gold ballot box, right? So there is at least one in every town, and there are multiples in some of our bigger cities. In Connecticut, I'm sorry if there are other folks from other states, but it was meant to be across the board. But in Connecticut specifically, there is a ballot box. They're gold and white. They're beautiful. They do look like mailboxes though, but they are official ballot boxes, and you can take your physical ballot and put it in the box, and then you know that the town clerk, the registrars, they are checking those mailboxes every day. So if you're nervous about putting it in the mail and you want to make sure that it's going to get there on time, you can definitely put it in the drop box, and then you can feel confident about your ballot getting to where it's getting. If you live in a town like I do, that per capita is something little, I plan to go to vote in person. I've never had to wait in line in Gales Ferry, Connecticut. I've never had to wait in line. Thankfully I'm not in any at-risk population. I'm able to go in person. In Connecticut, we don't have early voting like they do in some of the bigger states that have longer lines. So if you can go in person, go. But if you do plan to do the absentee ballot, my advice, I guess, would be to drop it in the drop box that's at your town hall. Okay. So, all right. What's our next question? Oh, our next question. Oh, sorry. So our next question, Senator Kamala Harris is a woman of color running for the office of Vice President of the United States. Tell us how you feel about her presence in the race. What conversations or perspectives has this sparked for you? Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
When I was introduced, it did not mention that I worked for Howard University. And so it has sparked a lot of pride, even though I didn't graduate from Howard, but I worked there. And she's a graduate of Howard University. So we are so proud, bison proud of her. And I work with a lot of Black women's organizations. And so it has sparked a lot of interest on the part of Black women in the electoral process, even though we've had some fights with some of the younger women around her having been a prosecutor. So, so we've been working around that, because it was interesting the debate last night to listen to Vice President Pence run the whole argument that some of these young people have been saying about why you shouldn't vote for her, and her record as a prosecutor has really been distorted. So I think it has generated a lot of interest, but I'm now hearing that they need to put something in place to get interest on the part of Black men, because they don't feel like they have any motivation to go to the polls. So now as Black women, we are trying to come up with, okay, how do we help the men to convince the men that they should go out and vote? So that's where we are now that we have the women all hyped up.
Yeah, how do the Black men feel about it? Are they
Well,
as supportive of her as the women are?
No. And that's what I say. Now people are coming to us and saying, how can we get Black men motivated to go out and vote? Well, last election in 2016, Trump got a greater percentage of Black men than he did of Black women. And they're saying that he's probably going to get even more this time, because you had all the Black men that he paraded at the Republican convention. So, and now he's trying to convince this, what's it called, a platinum plan that he has out there for Black people. Saying that
I don't know about that. Tell me about that.
Well, he says that he's put more money into historically Black colleges, which is not the truth. And he says that he's passed the One Step Act. But that was the Senate. That was Tim Scott and people in the Senate. So all this stuff that he's around parading and talking about Black people had the lowest unemployment. And my answer to that is, yeah, we had the lowest unemployment when we were slaves. So don't tell me about that you got us employed. What kind of jobs were we employed in? And I think I better shut up.
It's okay, you can rant. What I loved when I started learning about Kamala was about the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. That is a powerhouse. I had never heard of it before.
Well, you may be treading in some bad water right here, because some of us are members of Delta Sigma Theta sorority.
Well, I'm sure you're powerful too. I just learned about that one, which was my ignorance, because clearly it's a very important. And again, they've divided and conquered us as women. We can't have this continue. I mean, I think it's great that there's a strong Black sorority. I think that's terrific. But it has weakened us as women by being separated, and we need to come together and be allies.
Well, I actually don't think that that's going to be a problem at all in this election. I posted something on the NCNW Facebook yesterday, and it's a photo of all from representatives from all the Black sororities, Divine Nine sororities, all marching together to the polls. So we're not going to be divided in that way.
A common enemy really helps pull people together.
Exactly. Or a common goal, right?
We have a common goal.
Yes, to have our voice heard. So, and I mean, I really do think that there has been some really creative ways in order to get folks. I chuckled a little bit when you said, how do we get men? Because I don't know if anyone saw the video, Get Your Booties to the Polls, with the exotic dancers last week. So, we'll do whatever we got to do. That's how important it is.
We'll do it.
Yeah. So, Jean.
I think after Trump's comments today about her, I think more men might vote for her based on, him dissing a Black woman. But I was fortunate enough to hear her speak at the NAACP convention in Detroit last year. And I had some concerns because I have relatives in California, and they've had concerns over the year when she was Attorney General over she had good intentions, but some of what she did went a little off track. Some of her lawyers with prison reform, when they were told to, some of your prisoners you need to remove from the prisons because you have overcrowded. Lawyers, well, if we let people go from the prisons, then we will lose prison labor because they were the groundskeepers, the cooks, and stuff like that. And these were the people who were working under her, were making comments like that. So that was, a little, that didn't make her look good. And then she had a truancy law where it was a crime if your children did not go to school from kindergarten to 8th grade, and it was a $2,000 fine or up to 1 year in jail. And, like I said, it was good intentions, but it didn't go well. But however, she has evolved from that time, and that makes a difference. The evolution has made a difference. And, like I said, she has evolved. She has shown that she's willing to listen and to necessary changes. So that makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And I think as women, we know that, and you, many of you all can speak to this even better than I can. We know that who we are at the beginning of our careers is not really who we are at the end of our careers, because we are made to do and behave and respond to things in a certain way in order to continue to develop ourselves and our careers. So, and you all just reminded me that I met her and heard her speak at the Netroots conference in New Orleans with lots of progressive. I mean, AOC was there, and Elizabeth Warren was there, and Cory Booker was there. So it was overwhelming, but so it is always awesome to see to see folks as they are evolving in their career, right? So you see folks and you're like, oh, she's phenomenal, she's great, and you think, and 4 years later, now she's the vice presidential nominee. So the conversations that I think that it has sparked in my circles is one of absolute pride. I'm on different levels, right? I am an HBCU grad, and hearing HBCU so often come up in national conversation right now just feels so wonderful. I mean, we've loved it. We've loved it for forever. But hearing it in national conversation and, having that representation in the White House is going to be huge, because historically Black colleges have been educating the best and the brightest, the greatest minds for 200 years. And I'm so excited to hear people who've never even, who it wasn't even on their radar, now it's on their radar. So that's great. And again, I keep talking about intersectionality, but all of the different things that she represents, right? All of the different pieces of her that she brings to the table as this package, this wonderful woman. So, I'm excited to support her. And I hope that you all are, and with all of the things that she brings with her background, right? So of course, we're not going to love all of the policy that she made over the years, but I'm excited that she's sparking these conversations, these perspectives, and as Dr. Scott mentioned, getting people involved in the process, right? Getting people fired up and excited. And engaged in the process. All right, one last question. Ooh, yes.
Hi, everyone. Speaking of Kamala evolving, I think we can see how that's happened since the first debate, because the first time she was on the stage, and when she went after Joe Biden the way she did, I was turned off. I'm being honest, and I was really rooting for Stacey to be the VP. I know she didn't have as much to offer, perhaps not running for public except for governor, but I think we can, if we stand back, no, I don't want to use that term. If we just stop and think where she's come from that initial debate, and now she's singing the praises of the very person that she basically attacked on that first night. So I'm very happy with her. And as an old lady, and I want to say thank you to Mrs. Scott. I had difficulty getting on, but when I hear your story about trying to your parents doing everything to register and what they went through to register to vote, that spoke volumes to me, because I'm originally from Charleston, South Carolina, and basically had to go through that. I was a college grad when I tried to go and register to vote, and the registrar told me that I had to pay poll tax, interpret the Constitution. So I thank you for your involvement, and let's support the ticket. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Clark. Okay, so how do women get prepared to vote? How do we prepare for this? I mean, is it sage and meditation? Is it education? How do we prepare? And then we'll ask the attendees if they have any other questions as well.
Well, let's be realistic. It's the women's vote that decide elections, and it's Black women's votes that decide democratic elections. And think about it, the Women's March started after Trump won the election because women knew the truth of what was about to come down. So we've been pretty steady on what's going to happen, and we had to increase our political engagement. So we just have to stay the course. We have to really stay the course. Because if we don't, it's only going to get worse before it gets better.
Like they're saying now, make a plan. If you've got children, make a plan for childcare. If you have arthritis of your knees, bring a lawn chair with you if you're going to have to wait in line. Bring snacks, wear a diaper. Because I don't think we're going to have that problem here in southeastern Connecticut, but you hear about it around the country where you really do have problems. But go early in the day so that if there's a problem, you can resolve it. You'll have time to resolve it. Give yourself time. If you're older, be careful with your health. You know, get good protective equipment and or get your absentee ballot in.
Absolutely. Dr. Scott?
Well, Joan just said what I was going to say is that we are telling people now they need to make a plan.
Yeah.
A plan not just for yourself, but for your family members. Because if we as women, we are the leaders around this voting, and we are the ones that make certain that our husbands and other sons especially, that they go and vote. So I think you have to bring the village with you and figure out how the village is going to vote, and make certain, you know, you understand how you're going to vote. You know, in Connecticut, you may not have the ability for early voting or absentee ballot, but in a lot of places, there are a lot of choices as to how best to vote. And so you have to decide. And then the police, I mean, the polls are in so many different new places now until you really have to study, because I'm still not quite sure whether early voting is going to take place. You know, whether I see a list of places, but I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to early vote in places outside of my district. So I need to go and I haven't gotten quite ready yet for when I'm going to vote. I just know I want to do early vote. I want my ballot. I want to be able to put my ballot in because I want my ballot counted. And some of these drop-off places, I said people may get tired in the night, or tired of counting all of these ballots by hand, and they say, okay, let's throw away the next 10. But I hope that doesn't happen. But you have to be deliberative about voting this year in a way that you haven't had to be in the past.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I have one more poll for you. And this one is a trick question.
Well, I hope they do.
Awesome. Good. I didn't really give you a choice. It was basically yes or yes. So, but we have about 5 minutes. If anyone has a question that they'd like to pose to our guests, I see you guys have been very active in the chat. So thank you for that. Anyone have a question that they want to pose to our guests? Thank you for volunteering to work at the polls.
I wanted to just say thank you to all the panelists. This was very informative. And the idea of making a plan to vote is really something that we really need to, everybody really needs to take to heart. If you're afraid of going to the polls, or you think you might have some difficulty with the polls. Today, I voted at the box at the town hall, and it's very simple and very straightforward. If you get that absentee ballot and just take it there and slip it in. But you have to feel comfortable in whatever you do. They do say that they're going to check those town hall boxes and empty them every day. So hopefully that will happen and my vote will count, and along with all those others who use that. But initially I thought about going to the poll. I said, I want to go and I'm going to go. And then I said, well, and why risk the more COVID than being intimidated by anybody? But I saw in the chat, what I wanted to say was that I saw in the chat someone said that they were empowering young people to stand in line for the older people. So, you know, that's a plan, that's an idea I hadn't thought of in the past, thought of until this time, till seeing it in the chat. So there are some things that we can think about doing that will help those people who might get tired or might feel a little bit intimidated. I saw somewhere else, not in this chat, but I saw someone else talking about picking up the ballots for the people in their communities and taking them and putting them into the silver or gold boxes in front of the town halls also. So, and that was a way of getting the young people engaged in the process. So yeah, there's some ideas out there, and I think we just have to really think about that plan and how we're going to carry it out.
Yeah, I think you're only allowed to deliver 3 ballots that aren't your own. And you have to sign on the outside of the envelope that you have done that.
That's if you take them inside, but if you take them and put them in the slot box in front of the town hall, you don't have to.
I think, well,
that's the point of the plan, right? So
Right.
you definitely have to do the research and make sure we're doing the right thing the right way.
I'm sure you know about North Carolina, how they collected all those ballots and helped the people fill them out the way they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
In the last election, yeah.
If people are feeling intimidated about going to the polls, then we might have to go old school. And if we have to surround people to get them to go to the polls, to get them in there, we will do that. I mean, to make sure people feel safe and comfortable. I mean, COVID, but it's to make sure they feel safe.
Absolutely.
Do you think in southeastern Connecticut that people feel intimidated about going to the polls?
Do you remember what happened when the president came to speak at the Coast Guard Academy? Did you see who was outside the gate mixed in with all the normal people?
Yeah, the KKK was there.
So yeah, there are people like that around here. So
I've seen a lot of flags.
And even more than intimidation, it really is just that people don't know all of their rights, right? So I had a friend last year who went to the poll and had that whole address mix up, and they told her that she was in the wrong place, and she got discouraged because she was supposed to go to another place and change her address and all of that. So we want to make sure that we're helping people through that process too, so that they know that you don't have to have your ID unless you're a first-time voter. You can register to vote day of here in Connecticut, right? So those are the kinds of things that we as community organizers want to be a resource to people, so that they have somebody that they're comfortable asking those questions of, and asking them day of the election. The Secretary of State's office has a voting hotline that is open all election day. So if something funny goes on at the polls, you can call and they will get that rectified. But I do think that having a plan is a great way to make sure that those things don't happen, and that you get there early enough in the day that if something were to happen, that you're not discouraged and you do get and have your vote counted. ladies, we are 2 minutes over. So I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. Thank you to the Southeastern Connecticut Women's Network for having this idea and sparking this conversation. Thank you to the National Council of Negro Women, and that was our state convener, Joanne Miller, who just spoke. Thank you from the national organization, NCNW, League of Women Voters, the NAACP, all of these amazing organizations that are doing the work to make sure that our voice is heard, both here on the hyper-local level, on the state level, and on the federal level. We are powerful. We are impassioned and passionate, and I think someone put in the chat, like, our lives really do depend on this vote, on this election. We really, now is the time. I'm sure we've said that at other times in our history, but now is absolutely the time for us to be together, to come together, to make sure that we secure a future for ourselves and for our families and for our generations to come. And for our ancestors, right? Thanking them for bringing us here, and we don't want to just stop here. We want to go on, as the elders would say. So again, Dr. Scott, Jean Jordan, Joanne Moore, thank you so much. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for the robust conversation in the chat that I couldn't even keep up with. I wish you all well. Please do continue to be engaged, stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you at the polls.
Thank you, Kia, and thank you all the panelists who joined us tonight. Thanks for everyone joining us tonight. And I just want to remind you, next month we'll have another Unconscious Bias series. And on the 21st of October, Lottie B. Scott will be speaking at our virtual luncheon. She's going to talk about her experience as a female and the changes she's seen, and more specifically, a female of color, and all the changes she's seen. So it's going to be a great presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.